Welcome once again, everybody, to RadioLeMans.com's coverage. A warm welcome, everybody, to RadioLeMans.com's coverage of the VLN Deutsche Payment Trophy. So already the fourth round of this 9-round championship, the standalone rounds from the 24 hours that we covered at the end of May, and a mere 148 cars due to start this phenomenal race. Remember, on the full Nordschleife, although not on the full Grand Prix Strecke as well, we take the slightly shortened route, although the full Mercedes arena. So slight variation from the Nürburgring 24-hour circuit, but nevertheless a brilliantly attended event, both competitors but also people in the stands as well. We will take you through the build-up to this fourth round of the season very, very shortly. But first of all, this is the countdown to green as the cars are being released now from a very large pit lane. And the cars, as usual, are stacked 4, 5, maybe 6 in per garage. And the cars are overflowing in the paddock area as well. There are 1 or 2 new entries, I'm pleased to say, with slightly different numbers from normal. A couple of cars from the Falcon Motorsports outfit, a BMW and a Porsche, that both ran at the 24 hours, but slightly different numbers for those guys. But also a car not with us this time, that's the Lance Motorsport Audi R8, which performed well in VLN 3 just 2 weekends ago. So this is the final round before we take kind of a summer break, with about 6 weeks between this event and the next, 5 or 6 weeks. But it's only been 2 weeks, Paul Truswell, since the last one that you weren't around for, but I'm sure you monitored how that went. And I really enjoyed it. There were slightly less of the SP9 cars, but that meant we could put focus on the touring car classes, and there was no shortage of battling, particularly in the BMW, the M235i class, amongst others.
It's a fascinating series, the VLN, and I must admit that it's kind of been one of those series that's been kind of on the periphery of my attention. But this year I've, for obvious reasons, taken much closer interest in it. But I mean, just talking about the calendar for a minute, because it does have this summer break. It also has that, I say bizarre break, but the other break in the calendar is, of course, for the Nürburgring 24 hours, which is kind of the background to the series as a whole, because you have 2 races at the beginning of the season. Then you have the Nürburgring 24 hours with its qualification race beforehand, which feels a bit like a 24-hour or a VLN race, but it's not. It's actually the qualifying race for the 24 hours. Then you have VLN 3 and 4 kind of hot on each other's heels, and then you have this big summer break. And then you have to kind of hit yourself on the side of the head and say, actually, there are 9 VLN races, and it then recommences in September or the end of August, and you have the rest of the season squashed in again, sort of pretty hotly on each other's tails. So it is an interesting little series. It's quite a big series. You say 150 cars going to be out there very shortly indeed, starting as ever in these 3 separate start groups. And I think one thing which characterises this one, Johnny, is the appearance of a new class, because we have what's called the Cup X class, or do we have to call it the Cup Cross class, because it is a Cup X class for KTM crossbows.
Yes, well, maybe have to have a discussion about that at a later date, but it would make sense to be the cross class. I'm not sure whether that rolls off the tongue quite as readily as crossbow, though. So we'll see. But
it's Cup X.
The Cup X, yes, they are definitely KTM crossbows. KTM, a manufacturer based in Graz in Austria, and they make motorcycles, and they make these brilliant little sort of track day style cars. And the modern day crossbow has this canopy that comes over the driver. The driver sits in the middle of these cars, and the canopy closes like a clamshell around them. And we've seen these cars race in the 24-hour series, for instance, particularly at Red Bull Ring during the 12 hours there. And there were a couple, I believe, at Brunel, if memory serves back in October of 2016. But yes, this is the first time we've had an exclusive KTM crossbow class. I remember KTM's raced in the British GT Championship as far back as something like 2008. So they're not a new car, although this slightly facelifted version is certainly new. And the Renault RS01, again, not strictly a GT3 car, but the 55 is entered into SPX, isn't it, rather than the SP9 class. But we expect SPX machines to battle with the SP9s. And at Imola last weekend on RadioLeMans.com for the 12 hours as part of the 24hourseries.com, the Renault RS01s entered as the FGT3s and effectively are put into the A6 class there, but this one is slightly different. You can differentiate SP9s from SPXs, although we expect them to be on similar pace. I noticed the car off the track a little while ago. It was down in the 300s hatchback, sporty hatchback that were being, I think,
on the
towed back. Or, yeah,
on the back of a flatbed trailer.
Missing a front bumper and with some front right damage as well.
Yeah, this is, or I think it was, a privately developed Kia Ceed. Kia not having been in the VLN before, although different people start writing in, they have participated, of course, in the Nürburgring 24 hours. But the Kia Ceed was due to be racing in SP2T. Now, whether that car is going to be able to start the race or whether it will end up starting from the pit lane remains to be seen. But the Kia Ceed was kind of a 387 to be driven by Bernhard Wagner and Miguel Toril Bocoy from Spain, and was supposed to line up 140 out of 145 cars, but that car, it would seem, having had a problem during the formation lap, which is itself, of course, quite an adventure on the Nürburgring. Nürburgring 24-hour circuit, or at least the Nürburgring nearly Gesamtstrecke. They just do the little cut through, which I think is the easiest thing to call it. The German title is Kurzanbindung, but it's easy to call that a cut through, which in effect cuts out the forward Dunlop curves. So instead of going all the way down to the big Dunlop curve at the bottom of the hill there, it kind of cuts through just after doing the Mercedes Arena. The other differential to the Nürburgring 24 hours course is that they do the Fulham Mercedes Arena. At least as far as I know, they do the Fulham Mercedes Arena.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And then they go, let's say, through this Kurzanbindung, through the cut through, and then back into the left and right, which has various names depending whose sponsors appear on it. Used to be the Vorsteiner curve, and we'll see whether or not that's actually got Vorsteiner advertising on it. And then they head off through those two very fast right-handers, which then take them onto the full Nordschleife down into the Hatzenbach, where you and I had a splendid walk a few months ago, Johnny.
Yes, at the end of May. It was fantastic weather, and it started off with you and I saying, well, let's go and have a look at Hatzenbach, because that's not very far away from the main paddock area. And the walk continued, and it continued, and as you say, we got all the way down to Arenberg before you realised you probably should turn back now, because you needed to make sure you were back for the next session. The 59 Manthey Racing Porsche then is fastest to start from pole position for this latest round. I am looking at the right...
These are the practice times here, so it's an 8 minutes 3.682
in practice.
In practice. Just half a second. Can you imagine that over an 8-minute lap? Just half a second separating that from the second fastest car, which is BMW, the Falcon Motorsports. You mentioned briefly that we've got two Falcon Motorsports cars, one BMW and one Porsche. They're lining up on the first and second rows of the grid on the outside of the two rows there. If you've got access to pictures, the BMW is the number 3 car and the Porsche is the number 4 car. It was definitely Steph Dusseldorp who did the time in the BMW for the Falcon team. Steve Smith did the time for Manthey Racing in the 59 car. what I failed to do was to see whether it was Klaus Bachler or Robert Adenauer who set the time in the Falcon Porsche. But then on the inside of the second row, Johnny, is another BMW. This one of 3 Valkenhorst Motorsport entered cars at the Nürburgring this weekend. This is the number 100 car, which I had thought was last year's number, which they used to celebrate 100 years of Dunlop. But I think having got the number 100, they just decided to keep it.
100 is used in the States by BMW, though, isn't it? Or
Well,
has
it was brought to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Dunlop.
Right, nothing to do with BMW then?
No.
Okay.
No.
Obviously the mind has been mixed up a little bit there as far as I'm concerned. There is also some argument as to whether this is the 47th or the 48th edition of the Adenauer ADAC Rundstrecken-Trophy. I realise that's somewhat academic, but it has a good history of almost 50 years. And I'm sure they'll get the 50th year smack on right in either a couple or 3 from now. Now, the shuffling of the cars on the grid is always something to behold, because we have in places a 3 abreast grid. They won't start like that, but that's just the method of getting the cars into position so that they are then able to go on the green flag lap. And as you say, that's an art in itself, just managing to get the cars away on time, because we're talking about for the very, very quick cars, just over an 8-minute lap, but at green flag lap pace, more like 20 minutes, is it, Paul?
Yeah, that's right. And they do have these 3 separate start groups, which set off in 3 minutes within literally 2-minute intervals of each other, and then they head off on the actual race, hopefully spot on midday local time being German time. Which is 11 o'clock here in the UK. Yeah, getting everybody into the right place is always a little bit awkward, and as ever, crowds of people around on the grid observing these really quite amazing, for the most part, GT3 cars, but also GT4 cars and various touring cars running in the different categories as well. But all of them looking forward to 4 hours of racing around the Nürburgring full circuit.
I don't really want to get entrenched in the whole balance of performance argument, because we do tend to spend quite a lot of time on that when it comes to GT3 racing, but also GTE racing at Le Mans. But there is no Lant Audi this weekend. They did compete 2 weekends ago on Dunlop tyres, interestingly, because we had the tyre contention as well during the 24 hours, in that Lant were running Michelin and Dunlop for a time during practice and qualifying, and then they eventually decided to plump for Dunlops because of issues with the tyre that Michelin had brought to the race, and basically not allowing access for anybody for the Nordschleifer specific tyre, I believe it was. So all the Audi teams ending up on Dunlop tyres, but Lant have now effectively withdrawn from this round, and we understand it is in protest over changes to the balance of performance, but there is hope that those BOP levels will be revised in time for the 5th round, which is in fact a 6-hour race in August. And I mean, I for one would like to see Lant back. They've always been a bit of a favourite of mine. Ran 2 cars during the 24 hours, just the one during VLN 3, and they will be a sad miss for me. It's always tricky though, balancing the field when you want lots of different manufacturers, Paul. And obviously you've got mid-engine cars, you've got front-engine cars, you've got rear-engine cars, and you're trying to make sure that they're equal around such a long and complex lap. It's tricky being the balanced performance clerk, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and particularly with, how can I say it? I call it a sprint race, a 4-hour race. But obviously the performance is far more critical over a 4-hour race than it would be over the 24-hour race. And I mean, highlight of Lant's season, obviously, that win in the Nürburgring 24 hours, by whatever means they managed to do it. And in the end, it kind of shows how irrelevant balance of performance comes in a 24-hour race, when you had the situation with the car coming into the pits and then dithering around about what they were going to do, finally managing to put it onto wet tyres, which proved to be the master stroke. No, I mean, it was a great win for Land Motorsport. I think it's a pity they're not here. You're absolutely right, but and I would like to think there are other ways of protesting against balance of performance other than just not turning up. But that's the story that we've been given, and that's who we don't have. We have 3 Audis altogether in the field for Audi fans. Do you still have your Audi?
I do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So we've got an RS3 and I think 2 RS3s and a TT in the entry list. 2 RS3s and a TT on the entry list. So worry not for Audi drivers. But I think up at the front, it really is very much a battle between Porsche and BMW. But of course, the winner of VLN 3, somewhat against the odds. And I mean, you watched the race in detail, Johnny. It was the Wochenspiegel Monschau Ferrari.
Yeah, it was against the odds, I suppose, going into the race. Not many people would have bet on the Ferrari outdoing all the German cars and teams, I suppose. But Wochenspiegel is a German team, nevertheless. But they just looked good after the first stint, and you kind of thought that everybody else would have to up their game, because they were able to go to 8 laps on the stint, and were they able to at times push it beyond that to 9? I'm trying to remember back now. I think they split it evenly, whereas other teams decided to do it in 7s, because effectively we were working to, I seem to remember, 28 laps across the 4 hours, and then you obviously could split that 4 lots of 7, or if you did decide to go the full 8, you'd need a splash then. And it was fascinating because we didn't have that many SP9s, but there was lots of different routes of strategy, and that's what kept the race alive. But the Ferrari looked very, very strong, really, from that opening stint, and they got their driver combination on the money. It's not changed, so it's Georg Weiss again, Oliver Kainz and Jochen Krumbach, exactly the same 3 drivers that did the earlier race, and well worthy of that victory.
Yes, and I think I read somewhere that only the 2nd ever Ferrari win in a VLN race, so in all the history of VLNs, and the previous one was a 458, which was the previous winner of a VLN race. So that Ferrari, then the Wochenspiegel team Monschau car, will be lining up on the 3rd row of the grid behind, as we mentioned already, a Manthey Porsche and a Falcon BMW, and then a Falcon Porsche and a Valkenhorst BMW on the first 2 rows. Then it's the Ferrari on the 3rd row of the grid, and sharing the outside of that 3rd row is the SPX car that you referred to a little while ago, Johnny, the Renault RS01, which is Heiko Hammel and the pseudonymous driver Dieter Schmidtmann. We've got pseudonymous driver Steve Smith in the pole position car, the Manthey Racing Porsche. We've got Dieter Schmidtmann, which is kind of a variation on the same name, in the Renault RS01, then, and that's starting on the 3rd row of the grid. Again, the RS01, a nice car to have, because it throws a bit of variety in there. Not a proper, as you mentioned, not a proper GT3 spec car, but I don't think it's going to be very long before we see that car bringing a 3rd nationality, if you will. You spoke about the German entries or the German cars, the Ferrari, but it would be good as well to have the French Renault performing there as well. And we know that it's quick.
Yes, it's proved to be rapid around here. Full carbon brakes and carbon tub as well. Many of the components, the body panels on that car are carbon fibre as well. Incredibly strong car, but also very light as well. And originally developed for Renault's own series, the Renault Sport Trophy, which sadly only ran for 2 seasons. I had the opportunity to commentate on a couple of the rounds last year, and due to, I think, lack of interest, stroke entries, Renault deciding to wind that up. It was the championship that morphed out of the Renault Megane Trophy, which ran for several more seasons. But thankfully, obviously there are quite a number of Renault RS01s still around that need a race, and this is one of many places that they can now be found on slightly longer distance runs. They were originally designed to do a maximum of 70-minute races with a driver change, and then on the same weekend as Renault Sport Trophy, you'd have that long distance race and then 2 sprint races, one for your AM driver, one for your pro driver, but certainly a 4-hour race, not really in mind when the car was designed, and certainly not 12 and 24-hour races, but they have been capable of doing those, and indeed won the Mugello 12 hours last season, or season before.
They've had two wins in 12-hour races in Mugello, or at least in the Preventic Series. But yeah, so good to see that car. As I say, we'll see how it goes. The third row of the grid then shared between the Ferrari and the Renault RS01. The next row back is a couple of Porsches, but very strong Porsches indeed. The 911, the Grello car, and that has now officially been declared its name, Manthey Racing, despite being a German team and not very many of them speaking English, but the Grello car being green and yellow, the 911 car.
Yes.
Ricard Leitz and Romain Dumas, superb driver lineup on that car, and that will be sharing the fourth row of the grid with a Fricadelli Porsche, which will be driven by Frank Stippler and Norbert Ziedler. And again, two very strong Porsches then on the fourth row of the grid. And just to give you an impression, the Manthey car, the 911 Porsche, is less than 3 seconds off pole position. So you've got the first 7 cars on the grid separated by less than 3 seconds, and less than half a second, less than half a second separating the front 2 cars on the front of the grid. So it is pretty tight at the front of the grid. So 2 Porsches on the 4th row. On the 5th row, a pair of Valkenhorst BMWs. I said BMW here with 3 cars, but the number 36 car, which is on the inside, Claudia Hürtgen's car, is the BMW Z4 GT3, whereas the 35 car running on the outside of row 5 is another of the BMW M6s, like the one that's up on the 2nd row of the grid. If anything, I think the 35 car has Jordan Tresson as one of the drivers, Henry Valkenhorst himself, another of them, and then David Schiewitz, the 3rd driver for the Valkenhorst M6. The GT3, I mentioned Claudia Hürtgen, she'll be sharing with Peter Posebach and Alex Lambert. So those are the drivers in the 2 Valkenhorst cars on the 5th row of the grid.
You're listening to the Countdown to Green ahead of VLN 4, and it's Paul Truswell and Johnny Palmer at Blackpool Johnny taking you through this latest round of a 9-race championship. You've been spoilt as far as VLN is concerned in recent weeks. 2 races in the space of a couple of weeks, and then there's this pause then until the 19th of August for the next round. So a chance to get your VLN fill before we head off for the summer break. Chris Whale is already on board, all jobs completed for the morning, so a lazy Saturday ahead, listening and watching the latest VLN race. And Right Turn Lover, thanks to you for reminding me that KTM's corporate headquarters actually in Mattighofen. That's the M in KTM indeed, but only the cars are in Graz. I knew I had Graz on the brain somewhere. And also at Lamington 18, Time Certain Clock is on board, I think possibly for later on, because this race, if you miss any of it, will be available as a podcast as well, together with our Countdown to Green programme that we're currently working our way through. 22 minutes away from the start of the race. That means we're only a couple of minutes away from the first batch of cars being released onto their green flag lap. It is great to see the teal and light blue colours of Falcon Motorsport back with us after those cars didn't appear during VLN 3, and that team running 1 BMW M6, 1 Porsche. You tend to find that teams turn up, if they are going to turn up with more than 1 car, they turn up with 2 or 3 of the same make, but 2 radically different machines there. The front engine BMW M6, big car that, and set to be replaced with an even bigger machine as far as GTE is concerned. They're going with the M8 from next year of BMW, and then the slightly more svelte, you could argue, rear-engined Porsche, traditionally numbered 44, but these cars are 3 and 4 which makes things a little simpler. But I typed 3 and 4 into my spreadsheet, and up popped a couple of cars from Black Falcon. So some rejigging required there as far as the entry is concerned.
So that just shows which spreadsheet, what you used the spreadsheet previously for. Otherwise,
Correct.
It would have popped up with a couple of Corvettes, possibly.
Yeah, yes, absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing about cars that never change their numbers. You kind of have them set in your head at 3, as you say. It could be a Corvette at Le Mans, or it might be, well, I could probably reel off various national hot rod cars that are on the number 3 as well, depending on what category or formula you've been following recently. It's about just recalibrating the brain a little bit, but also reprogramming it, because certain numbers have to be found, because they may well clash with the entries that are already in VLN and here for the full season.
Just on the KTM crossbows, because we did mention them, 924, 925 and 924, 925 and 926 are the colour numbers of the 3 cars. Entered by ESET Motorsport. Look out for the Stuck brothers, Ferdinand and Johannes Stuck, at the wheel of the 925 car.
Just to tell you very quickly, the back of the grid at the moment reminds me of arriving maybe at Mallory Park at about 8 a.m. to see Marshall's cars parked on the circuit, and also you get that at Alton Park before a midday start, because you've got this central lane of asphalt which is still available to cars to work their way through, but then cars effectively gridded up in their groups further back, so they're not on the Dottinger, for example. They are winding their way back towards the paddock where they've been released, and using a bit of the cut through of the Grand Prix track, and then also an additional link road, it looked like, as well. So a lot of the touring car based machines are on this grid that snakes back in a slightly unconventional route, almost towards Hatzenbach. And once the cars are released, obviously that will generate more space, and I presume this first batch will be sent on their way, and then are they then replaced by the next batch stationary on the grid?
No, I think they'll all roll off together. We'll see what happens, but as far as I know, they all roll off together and then they kind of separate themselves out.
Later on around the lap, okay.
Sorts of Mallory Park breakfasts spring to mind as you talk about early in the morning at Mallory Park. No sign of bacon and eggs down at the Nürburgring, I don't suppose, sadly.
Probably not, no.
So, so they will be heading off on this the formation lap, still with some 15 minutes, more than 15 minutes to go before the start of the race. Talking about the crossbows, Freddie Bart and Arne Hofmeister at the wheel of the 926 crossbow, and the 924 car is the additional one from Niels Jung and Florian Wolf, slightly less well-known drivers in the third of the Cup X, running in their own class, the KTM crossbows. But it'll be interesting to see kind of where they finish in amongst the other GT4 cars, I suppose. It'll be a fair comparison to see whereabouts they end up. So off onto the formation lap, and just to correct something I said earlier on, they're not using the full Mercedes arena, they're just using the shorter version, and then the Haug hook, or the Mercedes hook, rather than the full Mercedes arena, and then coming out of that down to the sharp left and then right-hander, which takes them going down the hill a little bit, but then before they get too far down the hill, it's a right-hand hairpin to take the cut through to avoid having to go all the way down to the Dunlop curve.
Yeah, there are some weekends where this fairly easy right-hand hairpin, it is a hairpin, but it's not a super tight hairpin, and this configuration of track on the Grand Prix circuit is used for example, the truck meeting. There are regularly truck meetings held at Nürburgring, but they don't go all the way down to the bottom of the hill, which is a significant descent, and then climb up the other side. Ooh, what are that's the Falcon Porsche way off onto the grass there, so some erratic weaving. Drivers often warned in the driver's briefing not to overdo it when they weave, because the car arguably is not in full control there, and actually the Porsche just for a moment darted off to drivers left onto the grass, which I don't think was the ideal.
It was a very strange one, wasn't it? Because although it went off onto the grass and obviously wasn't intentional nor ideal, there didn't seem to be any panic about it. Just drove along the grass and then brought it back on again, as if to say, "Oh yeah, I meant to do that." Hope nobody was watching.
There seems to be quite a bit of grip on the grass though as well, because it changed direction fairly rapidly on the turf there. So maybe there's not been a great deal of rain recently. I can't believe I'm saying that in the Nordschleife, but a place with its own microclimate often. Although a glorious 24 hours was had at the end of May, apart from that last hour, which started to bucket down in certain areas of the circuit. Now, I thought they were using the full Mercedes arena, so there must be different routes through there. Get another opportunity in a second to review that, because the second batch of cars have been released. And smart Porsche there in what, 4th or 5th position, which is not the typical shape 911. It's almost the long tail version. Now that's the hairpin that is used in Grand Prix. They shoot round to the left.
Okay, no, that is the full Mercedes arena, isn't it? Yes, correct myself. That is the full Mercedes arena, because
rather than the Castrol S, it's been called, and the Haughook. Although some people call the fuller Mercedes arena the Haughook as well, so I'm never quite sure of the terminology there. But there is a very sharp right-left, which I always watch with wonder to see cars actually get through there with not a lot of contact. It's the 600 car that I'm intrigued by. Monstrous diffuser at the back. That knocks the recent Aston Martin diffuser in the World Endurance Championship into a cocked hat, I would say, because that extends out to almost half a car length behind the 600 Porsche.
Yeah, that 600 is a firm favourite. That's a Kramer Racing entered K3. It's a 911 K3 with a big whale tail on the back. And Kramer Racing, I think they're still in Cologne. They certainly was used to be in Cologne, and was a place I visited when I was living in Cologne. And Kramer have been Kramer brothers and Manfred, having been racing for many years, and great to have them still involved. And one of the drivers, and I would imagine he will be the start driver, Wolfgang Kaufmann, another name who's been around in endurance. The rest of the cars in Group 2 being headed, at least theoretically, by the SP2, SP3 turbos, SP2Ts and the SP3Ts should be up there at the front of that group, along with the B5s and, yeah, so it's probably the K-Man of the Adrenaline Motorsport Pixel team, which will be up at the front. And then the third group heading off right now will have the V4s, V3s and V2s, so certainly the more standard production vehicles running in the third group, and they'll be starting what amounts to 4 or even nearly 5 minutes behind anybody else in the front-running SP9 class cars.
Now in the treble 6 BMW, that's the blue and black car, is Thomas Jaeger, although not the Thomas Jaeger that we have become accustomed to in SP9 cars. It's the Austrian Thomas Jaeger, although still very, very quick, we must add. And he shares with Rudy Adams, this time Honnor's Motorsport, Team Shine Honor Motorsport. The Coppermore based team. 15 BMW M235i Racing Cup cars. There were 20 of them in VLN3. But nevertheless, this promises to be a fascinating fight. A 10-lap touring car race stretched across 4 hours, and it will be panel bashing, let's hope not, but door handle to door handle for much of that race. But obviously how you slice the race into the various stints will become key. These cars identical, and therefore down to the driver ability and experience, and also how quickly the cars are turned around in the pits.
Yes, I mean, the problem with racing at the Nürburgring, and if people who are listening have either never been to the Nürburgring or haven't watched any of it on the screens, is although you get used to the wide open spaces of the Grand Prix circuit, where there is lots of runoff and nice wide open spaces and relatively low curves, when you get out onto the Nordschleife, all of that changes. You get Armco barriers, which are very much closer. You get curves which are very much higher that you don't want to be bumping into, and you don't get any of this runoff area gravel beds that you do around the Grand Prix section of the track. So then when you do get somebody who wants to come fast, and very often that can be a faster SP9 car coming through, as well as two BMW 235i's battling with one another, the whole thing becomes very much more tight. And so, yes, I mean, we were talking about panel bashing, Johnny, and you sort of look at it and think, oh no, a 4-hour race, I won't be messing around with any of that. Well, it might well be deliberate, but it might well be something that kind of happens a little bit unintentionally as the race progresses. Let's hope not, and good to see, because these 235i's very closely matched indeed. So good racing prospects in all of the classes, which during the VLN 3 race.
Yeah, and it was nice actually to focus on the SP9s. Fewer of those meant that focus would shift further back into Group 2 and 3. Just to throw the spotlight on some closely fought fights. So, on any of the event races, there was a big incident actually fairly early on in VLN 3 involving the M235i Cup 5 division, with two of those cars badly damaged at the end of the Dottinger Höhe. I think all drivers were checked out and were okay relatively quickly, but we're obviously pleased with that, because cars could be fixed, and we're far more concerned about people inside. But they were fine. But then attention turned to whether the cars could be turned around within this relatively short time frame between races. So it's a strange place to have an accident on the long straight, but the kink towards the end of that can often throw a fly into the ointment, particularly if you're catching or being caught by slower or quicker cars, whichever was the case with those M235i's. You need to keep your eye on the mirrors, clearly, because the quicker cars from the two groups ahead of you will be coming through. But also the Cup 5 cars are the quicker cars in batch 3, effectively, so there are still cars to lap, even if you are in the third batch. We'll also be keeping you in tune with incidents around the lap. They are dealt with live, effectively, and by that I mean that intervention vehicles are thrown out into racing traffic, obviously covered by yellow and white flags, and sometimes you'll find cones out in the middle of the track when effectively the intervention vehicles have put in roadwork sometimes, if Armco barrier needs to be repaired. Cars are then asked to predict their speed. Now, is it 80 kilometres per hour or 60 But slow zones effectively are in place. Be a code 60 to take local code 60. This track is very, very long. So on this configuration, not quite 60, not very far off that. And as you've always said, Paul, if you have an incident affecting one or two corners, then you've got an awful lot more of the racetrack that can still be raced on at full speed. So just need to restrict the affected areas.
Yes, and the great thing about the Nürburgring is that the teams of marshals and rescue truck drivers and race controllers are all vastly experienced at doing this. And this race, we should point out, the Adenauer Trophy being run by the local club. in effect, the Motorsport Club of Adenauer is the local club that has based itself at the Nürburgring, the Adenauer bridge, where you used to be able to come onto the circuit to do your tourist laps a long time ago. Remember, these were not free to do half a tourist lap if you particularly wanted to. Starting at Adenauer Bridge at Breitscheid, and so the Adenauer Motorsports Club, the local club, running this race, and very much it's the local club in charge, not the Motor District Club running the weekly Transmat.
Yes. Well, that's great to see as well, and the fact that this race has been run for nearly 50 years, and it is the club presumably that have run it from year dot as well. So absolutely, the event has history, but also the club as well. They're one opportunity to run one of the VLNs. I do like the fact that each of the 9 races through the year is called something different, though. There are individual histories for each of the 9 events. BMW number 100, the car you can hear in the background, is the Walkenhorst Motorsport car with Christian Brognies, Michel Di Martino and Matthias Enkeler, the 3 drivers. Three of those guys involved in the previous event. Nico Menzel has driven with them in the past as well, but not here for VLN 4. That car to start from 3rd position then, ahead of the light blue and dark blue Falcon Motorsport Porsche with its Falcon tyres. There is a tyre battle to be mindful of in this as well. As we've talked about, the BMWs on their Falcon tyres. Walkenhorst, they're running on Dunlops, I believe. And the pole car, the Manthey Racing Porsche, is on Michelin's. As Porsches tend to do, sticking with the French rubber. Already there at the Kleiner Carousel, heading on to Schwalbenschwanz.
Schwalbenschwanz is the Kleiner Carousel.
Ah, see, I'd always wondered that.
Yeah,
fine.
It's
one of those places with... Yes, just a big small carousel, is it? That was my confusion. But yes, Swallow's Tail is the Kleiner Carousel. Thank you for confirming that. I just get very thrown off when the corners with 2 separate names. And then Galgenkopf is the right-hander. It's kind of a double right-hander which leads the cars then onto this long straight, the Dottinger Höhe, which runs parallel with the main road. It's the main road that runs past a lot of the headquarters for, well, not headquarters in terms of world headquarters for tyre manufacturers, but a lot of the tyre manufacturers that take part in this race do have some form of presence along that main road, together with car manufacturers as well. So weaving, if anything, happening a little more erratically now. I would say 3 or 4 lanes being covered as far as the left and right weaving is concerned from the front SP9 cars. And there's a couple of SPX machines in there as well, including the Renault RSA1, which will start from 6th position. And the 3 batches of cars have now become separate, although this first batch, the rear of those cars, the rear cars in this batch, still only just leaving the right-hander now. And I'm sure there will be an instruction fairly shortly for the cars to bunch up a little more readily than they are, because they're still in single file, effectively, behind the pace car. And arm out of the window, may well, yellow flag out of the window. They'll get the instruction very shortly to become 2 abreast, Noah's Ark style.
Yes, I would think that as they come into the final chicane, the final S-bend at Tiergarten, which brings them after the Antonius Bucher, they then come through that very tight, rather awkward chicane. After you've had the various the big open straight, you then have a very awkward chicane with quite high curves on it as well, as they then come into this chicane, and that's where they have to form into 2x2 formation, and that's where the start will then be given for the 4 hours of the Adenauer Trophy.
Yes, and this is a very narrow bit of track as well. It's not the width of the Grand Prix circuit, as they almost sneak their way back onto the Grand Prix Strecke from the Nordschleife. There is the option, if you're doing tourist laps, of course, to turn 90 degrees right and bypass the Grand Prix Strecke entirely. But this little link road with gravel traps left and right, very easy to trip up here, particularly at the start of an endurance race. So the 48th edition of the Adenauer ADAC Rundstrecken-Trophy, live here on RadioLeMans.com, about to get underway. The pedal is flat to the floor, and the red light's still on the gantry. No, they're out now, as the digital clock has started to count down, and that's a good start then from the pole position car, Manthey Racing Machine. Say started by Sven Muller, we don't know that for a fact, as the Falcon Motorsports BMW level with the Vulcan horse car, so, and almost getting the jump here. It's trying to defend its position of second place, with the 100 car trying at the inside for the first part of the Mercedes arena, then forced a little out onto the curbs through the second part of that, and the BMW in the Falcon colours might be able to force an opening to the Porsche sitting behind in fourth place. Not quite. And as these three cars squabble over second, third and fourth, just allowing the Manthey Racing Porsche a little bit of a gap. Further back, the other multi-course entry is the BMW Z4, battling with an M6 itself. Renault's running in fifth place, slight gap emerging between fourth and fifth positions. Renault RS01 fifth, and then the Ferrari, the Bockenspiegel Team Monschau Ferrari number 22 is running in sixth place. But everyone managed to squeeze through the Mercedes arena safely, it appeared, for the first time. So that's Group 1 safely through, Paul, and now we look forward to Groups 2 and 3 appearing very shortly indeed.
Yeah, we're 2 minutes into the race before we get the second group making its way across the start finish. But yeah, so Porsche from BMW second and third, Porsche fourth, Ferrari I think now has just got past the Renault. If not, then Renault and Ferrari running in fifth and sixth places very close together as well, as they turn left out onto the Hatzenbach and then down through these very tricky little left and right sweepers that bring them out onto the beginning of the full lap around the Nordschleife.
So the second group is just appearing now, heading into the final chicane, and a great sight these cars make, made up initially of Porsche 911s, together with that fabulous 600 car that will start in fourth position. And then just behind, well, we have Porsche 911s, and then Porsche Caymans, and then Renault Clios, together with probably some Opel Astras as well. So terrific variety represented in this second batch, and they are underway now. So powering their way out onto the Grand Prix Strecke. This is a bit more like it, because we're already up to 4 abreast, possibly 5 abreast as they head into the first corner. And the track is easily wide enough on the Grand Prix stretch to allow this to happen. And yes, making waves early on is that big 600 car, trying to gather positions, although outbraking itself a little into turn number 1, so possibly losing some time there, the Kramer Racing Porsche 911 K3. And it has gained a place, and the loser actually for the first couple of corners is that yellow and green Porsche that started on the outside of the front row, slipping to fourth position.
Yeah, I think that was 609, the one that slipped back. Wolfgang Despry with Oleg Kvitka in their 911 GT Cup car. Although they're Cup cars, they're running in special class H4, and it was the Alex Autumn driven car, number 87, which I think got the drop at the front of that little group of, say, mainly 911 GT3 Cups. But then behind that you have the various Caymans as well, which are running in that class. There's also a Black Falcon Porsche in there, which is Carsten Knetgas and Jürgen Bloll, who will be driving there. That's the number 602 car, which I think was up there in about third or fourth place as they headed through the Grand Prix part of the circuit and then out onto the Nordschleife now, or through the Hatzenbach onto the full Nordschleife.
So Clios of different shapes and sizes battling away with Porsche Caymans. It's an unlikely sight, but they are punching above their weight just about. And the third group now heading into Tiergarten as they head away from the left-hand kink and then to this ever-tightening double chicane, effectively. You're right about those high curves that will catch some out once we get to racing speed. Everything neat and tidy, though, so far as they head through the last bit of the chicane and onto the main straight, and the pace car will peel off. In fact, we had a car a bit further up, which I think was a racing car as well.
Yeah, I think that was one of the BMW 235i class Cup cars. But
right, and the Porsche, which might have been the pace car, actually. That was confusing me, but it's this is the 666 car, I think, of Jaeger and Adams.
Yes, and he's fighting it out with Michael Schrei at the wheel of the Bonk Motorsport car 691, I think that is, Johnny.
Yes, in the black car, and in fact the 691 BMW's gone right round the outside then of the pole sitter. And they have three more BMW M235i's snapping at their heels as everyone else managed to get through the first corner safely. It looks like so, fingers crossed, as the Jaeger and Adams car then now having to defend early on because 691 got a bit of a jump there at the lead of Group 3, and then 675 is the white BMW running in third position, trying to force the second place car into a mistake.
Yeah, 675, the Pixum Team Adrenaline Motorsport BMW, trying to move up there at the expense of the Securtal Stork Rennsport Heiko Eichenberg in number 694, which started alongside it, those two side by side. But whether it was Daniel Zils or David Griesner at the wheel of the Pixum Team Adrenaline car, I'm not sure, but 675 certainly making up a bit of ground at the start, as they already through the Grand Prix loop and heading off onto the Nordschleife, turning left at the end of what would normally be where the Formula One cars would turn right and loop back on to do another lap of the Grand Prix circuit. They turn left up the hill past the old pits, which were the pits for a little while, and then head down through the very tricky S-bends which comprise the Hatzenbach before heading off on a full lap of the Nordschleife.
Renault RS01, the G-Tronics team McChip DKR car, is now at full speed and chasing down in fourth position the Falcon Porsche. So three cars ahead of this fourth place fight that are just starting to edge away very slightly, containing two BMWs and the pole sitting Manthey Racing Porsche. They're already in fact at Schwalbenschwanz and now heading down towards Galgenkopf. So through that double right-hander they go, and the Manthey Racing Porsche in its white and yellow livery, headlights on, already onto the Dottinger Höhe with, in the mirrors, two BMW M6s, and then a bit more distant, the fourth place Porsche. Then it's the Renault, right with the Porsche for fourth and fifth. Ferrari number 22 slightly more distant. No danger of being overtaken from behind, although the Renault this time is going to be able to pull out from the racing line of the Porsche, getting the toe, and this as they go through a real cloud of dust there. Not sure what that was generated by.
Somebody must have locked a wheel as they came onto the brakes for the Tiergarten chicane, but across the line then at the end of the first lap, we'll put Sven Muller in the car because I think he certainly is one of the drivers of the Porsche, and he then going through in the lead of the race. But the battle is on between the two BMWs from Falcon Motorsport and Balkenhorst Motorsport for second and third places as they complete that first lap, Johnny.
Yeah, great fight for second and third, also very good for fourth and fifth, and it's side by side now between the Grello car, number 911, going around the outside of one of the Fricadelli Motorsport Porsches, car 31. So 31 and 911 are door handle to door handle, and the 911 can't quite make it work. So who are we putting in that car then? Either Patrick, was it Pilet or Dumas? Richard Leitz or Dumas, in fact. And down towards then the right-hand hairpin, which slices this Grand Prix Strecke in half. And car 31 will either be Norbert Ziedler or Frank Stippler. Both, whoever we're putting in each of these cars, they look to be very, very evenly matched, and you would expect that from drivers with such experience. And what a great honour it is to have these guys as part of VLN 4. I could say that there was a little bit of a lack of pure factory drivers in VLN 3, although an entertaining race it was. Sven Muller putting on a great show, and actually ably assisted by his two teammates in car 59, Steve Smith and Randy Walls, both driver names in inverted commas.
Just to confirm, Johnny, it is Sven Muller at the wheel of the number 59 Manthey Porsche, and at the wheel of the Falcon Motorsports BMW number 3, it's Jörg Muller. So we've got the two Mullers starting in those two cars. We'll pick up the rest of the drivers as and when we get information about them.
Car 924 is one of the new Cup X, Cup Cross entries, the ESET Motorsport machine, and this is the Niels Young and Florian Wolf driven car. Two drivers against that machine, and at this stage not sure who's in it for the opening stint. More of that might become clear once the first driver change rolls around and we can start to identify people on the belt ID or indeed their helmets. So Fricadelli versus Manthey still ongoing, and nearing the end of the first lap for now the Group 2 cars, and stretching its legs a little bit, that grey and red Porsche ahead of the order, but being caught by car 600, the Kramer Racing Porsche in class H4. But the cars it is up against aren't necessarily from class H4. They might be, but there was a fair mixture, I think, at the front of Group 2 as car 600 then crosses the line now. Lights flashing to nobody in particular for the car that started from pole position in Group 2. Might be that there's already one or two stragglers from the back of Group 1, and this yawning gap then between third and fourth positions of the second batch of cars. Much better battle behind the yellow and green 609 car that didn't get the best of starts. So that 609 Porsche 911 GT3 Cup car, which is another H4 machine, just ahead of an all Cayman battle, which contains 960, one of several Cup 3 machines. That's the MSC Adenauer EV in ADAC team. So
it's the
GT4
local in the
local race,
in the locally
run
organised race. Yes,
yeah.
we've got the race director at the wheel of that car. No.